21,000 years ago, the map of Indonesia looked very different. Java, Sumatra, Kalimantan, all the way to the Malay Peninsula were connected as one. Its area was more than 1.8 million kilometer, almost half the size of Europe. And the strangest part is that a landmass that large is now buried beneath the sea. The name of this landmass is Sundaland. This is not an internet theory and certainly not an exaggerated work of fiction. Now imagine this. If that land had never sunk, would Indonesia today be filled with herds of wild elephants, rhinoceroses, and even giant predators like those in Africa? The answer may be far more surprising than we think, because to understand modern Indonesia, we have to go back to a time when most of the area we now know as sea was actually an enormous green landmass. The term Sundaland was first popularized by a Dutch geologist named Renold Willem van Bemmel through his monumental work in 1949 on the geology of Indonesia. Western Southeast Asia was once indeed a single connected landmass. Its territory included Sumatra, Java, Kalimantan, the Malay Peninsula, and the shallow plains that are now the Java Sea and the Karimata Strait. To picture it more clearly, imagine you are standing on the northern coast of Java. If you kept walking north, you could cross the area that is now the Java Sea, enter Kalimantan, continue across land all the way to Malaysia, and even Thailand without touching seawater at all. And this fact immediately raises a much bigger question. If everything was once connected, why is it now separated into thousands of islands? The answer is hidden deep beneath our feet. Indonesia stands on one of the most brutal geological regions on the planet. This is where three giant tectonic plates meet: the Eurasian Plate, the Indo-Australian Plate, and the Pacific Plate. Imagine three enormous pieces of the Earth's crust pressing against each other for millions of years. This pressure creates subduction, a process in which one plate slips beneath another plate. The result is geological change on a massive scale. Mountain ranges began to form, volcanic belts emerged, and the land surface developed into something highly diverse. Now it is from this geological chaos that Indonesia's biological richness was born. Because when the Earth's surface is filled with basins, mountains, and highlands, many different habitats are created within very short distances. One side is humid, another side is drier. Some areas are hot while others are covered in mist almost all year round. Small variations like these create a natural laboratory of evolution. So if Indonesia is known today as one of the countries with the greatest biodiversity in the world, the roots of that story began with collisions of the Earth's crust millions of years ago. Even the fertile soil we stand on today is the result of continuous volcanic activity. Then came the phase that changed everything. Around 21,000 years ago, the Earth entered a period that scientists call the last glacial maximum. This was the peak of the last ice age. Global temperatures were much colder. Most of the Earth's water froze and became trapped in gigantic ice sheets at the poles. And when the world's seawater was stored as ice, sea levels automatically fell. Not by a little. They dropped by more than 100 meters. To put that into perspective, that is roughly the height of a 30-story building. When sea levels fell that much, shallow seafloors began to emerge. And in Southeast Asia, this change created something spectacular. The Java Sea emerged as land. The Karimata Strait became a vast plain. Most of the shallow waters around Natuna also rose above the surface. This was when Sundaland reached its greatest extent. And it is not impossible that areas now crossed by container ships were once crossed by herds of stegodons, ancient relatives of elephants. But Sundaland was not merely a vast landmass. It was one of the most complex tropical ecosystems that ever existed. Researchers estimate that this region once hosted around 25,000 plant species. Many were endemic. One of its inhabitants was the Dipterocarp family. This is a group of giant Southeast Asian trees that can reach heights of 70 meters. Trees like these function as natural carbon stores, regulators of local climate, and at the same time a home for megafauna. However, Sundaland also once served as a giant migration bridge for elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, and tapirs. They did not swim across oceans. They walked through grasslands and forests that today are buried beneath the Java Sea. And this fact explains why the fauna of Sumatra, Java, and Kalimantan are very similar to mainland Asia. Because geologically they were once indeed a single unit. At this point, a puzzle emerges. If everything was connected, why did Asian animals never cross all the way to Papua? And why does the fauna of eastern Indonesia resemble Australia much more closely? The answer was discovered by the British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace. While studying the Indonesian archipelago in the 19th century, Wallace noticed a very strange pattern. In Bali there were monkeys and tigers. Meanwhile, in Lombok, which is very close by, the character of the fauna began to change drastically. This gave birth to the concept now known as the Wallace Line, an invisible biological boundary that separates Asian and Australasian fauna. The cause lies on the seafloor. Between Bali and Lombok, and also between Kalimantan and Sulawesi, there are very deep ocean trenches. Even when global sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters during the Ice Age, these areas remained sea. This means that region never became a land bridge. And because large animals found it difficult to cross, evolution on both sides developed independently. The western side was filled with Asian-type fauna, while the eastern side developed with Australasian characteristics. If that is the case, then how could some giant animals actually reach Flores? And the answer will take us to a time when the world began to warm and Sunda slowly disappeared. Around 15,000 years ago, after thousands of years in extremely cold conditions, global temperatures gradually rose. The giant ice sheets that had long locked water at the poles began to melt, and when billions of tons of ice turned into water, global sea levels rose as well. Regions that had previously been vast grasslands gradually turned into swamps, then became bays, and eventually sank completely. The Java Sea began to form. The Karimata Strait filled with water. The shallow lands around Kalimantan disappeared. And within a few thousand years, that giant landmass almost half the size of Europe vanished from the surface. But in the middle of this process of submergence, the Earth experienced a sudden cooling event known as the Younger Dryas. Many scientists suspect it was triggered by the collapse of the Laurentide ice sheet in North America, which disrupted global ocean currents and made climate change far more unstable. For approximately 200 years, conditions on Earth became colder again. This is where the story of Sundaland enters its wildest phase. Because before it disappeared completely, this landmass was inhabited by giant creatures. One of them was the Stegodon. At first glance, it looked like an elephant, because it was indeed an ancient relative of the modern elephant, but with a much larger body and much longer tusks. And for hundreds of thousands of years, this animal was one of the main inhabitants of Sundaland. One of the Stegodon fossils was discovered in Sitalong, West Java. But the discovery that made scientists the most curious came from Mata Menge, Flores. There, Stegodon fossils were found close to stone tools made by ancient humans. This means there is a possibility that the ancestors of humans in the Indonesian archipelago once lived side by side with this animal. Now the question we set aside earlier reappears. If there is the Wallace Line, how could Stegodons possibly reach Flores? During periods of low sea levels, the distances between land masses were indeed much shorter. Part of the population may have successfully crossed through chains of small islands or certain natural events. Once they arrived on an isolated island such as Flores, they became trapped. And when large animals live for a long time on small islands with limited food resources, their bodies become smaller from generation to generation, a phenomenon known as island dwarfism. Sundaland was not only home to ancient elephants, it was also inhabited by predators whose size is difficult to imagine. One of them was the Ngandong Tiger. Its fossils were discovered around Ngandong, Java. Estimates by several researchers suggest it could weigh as much as 470 kilos. For comparison, modern Sumatran tigers weigh around 100 to 140 kilos on average. Why could it become so large? Because the Sundaland ecosystem provided all the conditions needed to produce giant predators. If you lived on the Sundaland plains hundreds of thousands of years ago, chances are you were not the most terrifying species there. And if that is not strange enough, there is another name, Gigantopithecus. This is a giant ape that for decades was believed to have lived only in China and India. Its height is estimated to have reached almost 3 meters with a weight of around 1.2 tons. Then in 2015, an archaeological team led by Sofan Nurwidi reported an interesting discovery from Semedo, Tegal, Central Java. This fragment opened the possibility that Gigantopithecus may have lived in a much wider region than previously thought. However, this finding is still being studied. But if true, Java was once home to one of the largest primates ever to live on Earth. However, when Sundaland sank, it was not only the map that changed. The entire web of life was fragmented, and the effects are still felt today. The clearest example is the Indonesian rhinoceros. In the past, the ancestors of the Javan rhinoceros and the Sumatran rhinoceros moved freely across the Sundaland landscape. They had vast ranges, large populations, and continuous genetic exchange. Then rising seas turned large groups into small isolated populations. And when populations become separated, their resilience declines. Today, the Sumatran rhinoceros is estimated to number only around 80 individuals. The Javan rhinoceros numbers even fewer than 50. From rulers of vast lands, they have become some of the rarest mammals on the planet. Humans experience the same impact as well. Many people ask how Homo erectus could reach Java 1.5 million years ago without sailing technology. The answer is simple. They did not need boats. They walked. At that time, Java was part of a vast landmass. At the Sangiran site in central Java, we find thousands of traces of their lives, stone tools, and fossils. Evidence of activity showing that this area was once one of the most important centers of ancient human life in the world. When Sundaland sank, human populations spread across the region became isolated on different islands. In the long term, geographic isolation like this helped shape the biological and cultural diversity of the Indonesian archipelago. Then a more speculative question emerges. Is it possible that the sinking of Sundaland left traces in the legends of the world? Some alternative researchers associate it with the story of Atlantis. In the dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato wrote about a prosperous land that sank in a short period of time. Because Sundaland was indeed a vast plain that eventually became submerged, some people see similarities between the two. Although there is still no scientific consensus, this speculation has also drawn attention to Gunung Padang in Cianjur, a megalithic site whose age is still being debated. Several analyses have indicated a very ancient age. There have even been claims placing it far older than the Giza pyramids. But one thing is clear. There are still many parts of the geological history of the Indonesian archipelago that we do not yet fully understand. And now we arrive at the final question. What if Sundaland had never sunk? Most likely Indonesia today would look very different. Wild elephants might still be walking across Java. Rhinoceroses might still roam freely from Sumatra to Kalimantan. But precisely because Sundaland sank, Indonesia became the most unique evolutionary laboratory on Earth. Thousands of islands created thousands of natural experiments. Each one gave rise to its own species, ecosystem, and history.